The problem that I have is I kind of was not too disheartened that the Bloc was going to be holding the balance of power, even though it's unusual, of course, because we're talking about Canada. The problem for me is, given that the NDP might, in theory, hold the balance of power, are we going to be getting again this ridiculous stuff that's on the extreme left from an economic perspective? My guess is for the first 12 to 24 months, the answer, I hope, is no, number one. Number two, the question about official party status is going to come about. And again, I'm a political neophyte here, but what a great way to make a deal saying it's up to the Prime Minister to give the NDP official party status, which gives them dollars to operate.
All right, John, welcome back to the tank. Holy shit, we got a lot to cover here. I mean, this was an election that we had been talking about for quite some time, but now Here we are on the other side. So just for anybody who is not paying attention to what happened in Canada on April 28th, we had a pivotal event that shaped basically a lot of the future domestic issues. And it was basically all because of one man, Donald Trump. The external pressure of Donald Trump swung a lot of the votes the other way as we headed into this election. And that's why we have a liberal, quote unquote, minority government that was elected in under Mark Carney. They secured a minority government, and we'll talk about if this is really a minority in a second, with 169 seats, just short of the 172 needed for a majority. Now, this marks the fourth consecutive Liberal government and third consecutive minority. Obviously, Carney, coming from outside of politics as a central banker with no prior elected experience, won his first election in a very Liberal stronghold. While on the other side, Pierre Poilievre lost his riding, which he had held for, I believe, almost 22 years. There was a story obviously going around on Twitter that got a lot of momentum about how his riding changed all of a sudden in the last election prior to the last 2021 election. The Liberals also won the popular vote with 43.7%, their highest share since the 1980s. Now, the Conservatives did have some pretty strong gains, but they missed out on the big opportunity, right? So they got 41.6% of the vote, 7.9 million votes, and increased its seat count to 144. But with Pierre's unexpected loss in his Carleton riding, mostly due to a protest campaign with 90 independent candidates basically voting against them, there were a lot of setbacks that had led to this loss. But the biggest collapse, John, was the collapse of the NDP. The NDP, the New Democratic Party, led by Jagmeet Singh, suffered its worst result in history, securing only 6% of the popular vote and 7 seats, basically losing its official party status for the first time since 1993. His loss of his Burnaby Central seat prompted his resignation as a leader. So what say you, John?
Which one do you want to attack first?
Well, I think the first thing we should talk about is whether or not this is actually a minority government.
So good starting point. So first of all, on your last broadcast, right before you and I, we commented, the one thing that we said is we were highly confident this was going to be a minority government. And so, yes, it was. And we weren't 100% sure in favor of who. And it really depended on whether the 18 to 39-year-olds would vote in record numbers. They did not. But when you segment the age groups, Nick Nanos had presented actual, we were correct. The 18 to 39 up to the 55-year-olds, the majority were voted for the Conservative Party.
The numbers from 18 to 34-year-olds were 41% conservatives. 35 to 54-year-olds were 46% conservatives.
That surprised me.
But the biggest surprise, John, 55 plus Social Security livers were 52%. No.
And what happened is the expectation and all of the polling was predicated on historical turnout percentages And so if you looked at the polling data, they basically assumed that 2x the 55-year-olds would vote. And what happened? It was aligned to the historical voting averages. And there wasn't this big, enormous 18 to 39 that were coming out in disproportionate numbers. Hence, the Liberals, as you had indicated, won. Now, in answer to your question, I personally believe, and if I were, running the party, I would operate as if I have a majority, because you have a de facto majority. Because who in their right mind uh, wants to have another goddamn election at this point? I'm done. I think everybody's done. And so I think you have a clear 12 months, and you might even have a clear 12 to 24 months. Remember that Harper managed 4 years in a minority basis, and you kind of do it issue by issue, which is not the worst case. The problem that I have is I kind of was not too disheartened that the bloc was going to be holding the balance of power, even though it's unusual, of course, because we're talking about Canada. The problem for me is, given that the NDP might, in theory, hold the balance of power, are we going to be getting again this ridiculous stuff that's on the extreme left from an economic perspective? My guess is for the first 12 to 24 months, the answer, I hope, is no, number one. Number two, the question about official party status is going to come about. And again, I'm a political neophyte here, but what a great way to make a deal, saying it's up to the prime minister to give the NDP official party status, which gives them dollars to operate.
This
And
is
if
a
he
very
does,
sensitive topic, John, because you're now
right,
talking about political bargaining chips here. So for listeners, official party status in the House of Commons requires at least 12 elected members of parliament. They get research funding, party staff funding, participation rights in debates, question periods in committees, and they get a budget, right? So they get an
budget,
actual dollar
that's the
budget,
killer.
which is almost 50,000 or something like that. They get election reimbursements. They get a lot of these things. They get details and security, and they get contributions to a lot of these committees. If you don't have official party status, you get none of that. So
Nothing.
does Carney extend the olive branch to the NDP, probably, to get them into the fold and give them official party status rights, if you will, and then bring them into majority government? I think so.
Yeah, the alternative is, and you're hearing the rumors, and I don't know if they're solidified rumors, is the rumor mill was that they're trying to convince three
MPs to
uh,
jump.
to jump and move on over. Now, if you're a member of the NDP, or if you're a voting member of the NDP, you're going to find that to be extremely distasteful. So, there's a couple of options on here. I think the former might be a smarter, more palatable way of doing it, with the latter being, I think it will attract a massive number of folks from across the parties, the political spectrum, saying, "Ooh, that sounds really awful."
That sure does. I mean, as we have a lot of people calling now for unity, we've got friend of the pod, John Love from Kicks at Capital, saying Canadians have spoken. Congratulations to Carney and his team, but we need to come together now as a country and putting partisan positions aside. However, the one thing that may end up putting this entire progress in jeopardy is Alberta. We have to talk about what Alberta is feeling right now, because Alberta, which is a deep blue province with 34 of the 37 federal seats going Conservatives, we have a pretty big problem here. Premier Danielle Smith basically came out swinging post-election, slamming the Liberal win under Mark Carney as a threat to Alberta's economy. She vowed to shield the province from federal overreach and hinted at escalating tensions if energy demands are not met within 6 months, talking about sovereignty, Western alienation, and also just the fairness, right? If you look at the 2024-2025 equalization payments, obviously from the West, as I said, Canada's a cow, right? From the West, you have 0 in BC, 0 in Alberta. 0 in Saskatchewan, 4.4 billion to Manitoba, 576 million Ontario, 13.3 billion to Quebec, and then the Atlantic provinces ranging from 2.9 billion down to 218 million. So, and then the entire Senate seats equivalency as well, right? How does the Atlantic provinces have the same or equal representation as Alberta does when Alberta has double the population? So that is something that Alberta is going to definitely focus on as well. And she's obviously having conversations with Trump about the 51st state.
You know, Matt, two things on this. First of all, I am highly sensitive for the frustrations on the West. And personally, I think we have screwed them over
100%.
a long period of time. And, you know, and you and I have talked about this as two tech guys here who want to see us embracing the digital economy and who believe that's the future to our country. The bottom part of this is, what is the most immediate thing that we can do to get us on the right path? And it is dealing with our natural resources and playing with our strengths. You can disagree with it, but you're not dealing with reality. And I don't think that they're asking for something that is unreasonable. They're asking for fairness. And you know what this reminded me of? I was a partner at Arthur Andersen, and we had two divisions. We had the Arthur Andersen tax and audit side, and we had what is now Accenture on the consulting side. And it was the audit partners who had the disproportionate vote, but the rising economics was the consulting, and they were just asking for fairness. And you know what we said? We said, fuck you.
Right.
And you know what happened? It split, and look at what happened. It feels the same.
Totally right comparison, Sean.
Folks, where is the economics? And yet we, you know, and again, I believe in Quebec too, but for God's sakes, the check is going one way and we're acting like we got to watch out on Quebec. And it's like, folks, the dollars are coming from one province. We are blessed with those resources. And again, the fact that when we saw the platform on the Liberals where they did not include the whole question around pipelines and LNG stunned me. And I don't understand why you wouldn't do this. And there is an opportunity to achieve the sustainability and the environmental concerns, but not ignoring the fairness question. And this is going to be the biggest challenge coming like a freight train right now. And I am worried about this.
Yeah, listen, I mean, the letter that was penned to the post-election government from tech leaders saying time to deliver is now. You know, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but there's a couple things that we want to see pretty quickly, right? The big policy demands from tech include capital gains reform, slashing, obviously, the lifetime, or capital gains numbers, and increasing the capital gains exemption to something like 2.5, which is something we've talked about a lot. Investment in small businesses for a federal tax credit by Canadian tech, focusing on AI and data infrastructure, trade and productivity focuses as well. But there is an article, John, that is circling around regarding sort of the overlap between the two collaborative policy alignments between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre that I thought was quite interesting to read. So can you share with our listeners what is happening here in terms of these comments that are coming from, the public and why they want to have more collaboration between these two parties now that we've passed the election?
Yeah. So let's now turn our attention to the digital economy. They are more aligned from a digital economy perspective than most people realize. And while the Liberal platform, they enunciated very specific things, and but they were very good and very positive. The conservative platform enunciated specifically less things. However, they focused more on the bigger conditions, like the capital gains rollover and the bigger issues. And some people interpret it as a negative that, there was an AI section. Well, if people actually understood what they were doing, they were killing the specific announcement of the AI, the 2.4 billion that the liberals had announced, but they were going to allocate AI stuff within the I said budget. So when you actually start to see the details, my guess again, and somebody actually correlated the two, there's about an 80% overlap. So, folks, maybe, just maybe, let's focus in on where we agree and leave the differences aside and move Canada forward. And that's what the innovation economy is looking to do. Because if we're pissing at each other, trying to figure out where we have major disagreements and we have the greatest threat to the economy we've seen in our lifetime here, like Canada is screwed. And I think that's the point around unity. Get over yourselves, work together on those areas, and let's move together. And again, entrepreneurs are leading the pack, but let's not fight behind them to make it worse for them already as it is.
Yeah, just to give our listeners some insight. So the paths they're looking towards are in the same direction. They're just taking different routes to get there. So for example, they both want to grow the economy through tax relief and internal free trade and faster infrastructure approvals. On the tax cut side, Carney proposed a 1% tax cut on the lowest tax rate. Pierre Poilievre wanted a 15% cut in the same bracket. Capital gains, Carney is going to cancel it. Pierre wants to eliminate it on reinvested capital. Or, healthcare worker access, there's a fast track to getting foreign trained doctors and nurses through either licensing reform on Carney's side or a national Blue Seal program standard that Pierre has. There's things around economics and immigration. There's things around housing affordability, which this one is a little bit different here, but they're all looking in the same direction. 2% NATO spend and procurement. Exactly.
Open banking. Like there's a number of things that are directionally the exactly.
So I'm going to take the conservative optimist view here that we will start to see progress, hopefully in the first, 6 months, but there's a lot of work to do. And I just don't want them to keep playing games around this party stuff. I want them to focus on who they're serving, the public, not themselves, which is hard in politics. We all have to agree on that. But let's move on, John, because there was some early wins here on Microsoft's AI monetization strategy. We're recording this on Thursday, May 1st. Stock was up almost 9% today, but they're seeing some interesting positive momentum in all this AI work that they've been doing. So just to give our listeners some ideas, there's Microsoft had quietly raised the Office 365 price target by 30% in January 2025. Which included a bunch of AI features by default, and no more asking customers to opt in. The price basically was like $13 per month for households, $10 for individuals. That saw a huge revenue jump, 10% year over year from last quarter in consumer Office 365. Subscriptions are slowing a little bit, but then there's the corporate side, and then there's obviously the custom AI model side as well. So what says you, John, in terms of how the incumbents are actually maybe the ones soaking up a majority of the economics? They're just doing it in a little bit different fashion than some of the startups are.
Yeah. So let me give you the opposite angle to that. And, you and I read a gentleman by the name of Ed Zitron as an example, who's, I'd say has, one of the harshest views, but I can't help but thinking about him in that he was suggesting, and specifically on Microsoft, that the pure AI related stuff, so, let's call it Copilot as an example, is not getting the traction that they were stating that they were getting. And yet Microsoft is paying, investing huge amounts of capital in here. And what they're doing is looking at their legacy products. And you just said it right now. They're saying, we're going to increase the price, and we're now not going to have you decide whether you want to use AI or not, because it's all bundled in. And we're going to call it that. We're going to say because of AI. I'm like, hold on just a moment here, folks. Is that what's really happening? Because when you're hearing the traction on the corporate side, and when I talk to the insiders, and I won't say who, they do acknowledge that it's been slower than they expected, and not saying that it's not happening, but there is a lot of projects going on and a lot of companies starting to go, okay, let's do some tests in this area and that area. And there's an openness for sure, but this massive tidal wave of incumbent dollars switching over to AI, you know, and again, I don't have access to the dollars, but I have my skepticism hat on right now until I see very clear evidence that true dollars is coming from this new revenue stream, and it's not really the recycled, older SaaS businesses.
You still think it's exploratory?
Again, I don't have access to the details, but when I actually start looking at the explanations, it's this murkiness, and I see on some smaller businesses where it's much easier to see. What you're seeing is the next version of the software is an AI based software. It's quickly cannibalizing the SaaS business.
Totally.
And the net revenues are not changing, but they're calling it SaaS revenues. But really what it is the next it's the next release of their SaaS businesses. So it's kind of hard to really understand. Again, there's optimism for sure, but is it turning to be truly new revenue streams?
Right.
It's a little hard to tell.
It's like the lift and shift when you were doing a lot of on-prem stuff, selling a lot of services there, and then everyone had to move to the cloud, and you're offering a new cloud product, but you're cannibalizing your on-prem business. And so the net revenue is the same, but there's a huge growth in this new, initiative product that you've released, but the other side is dropping on the same side. So you're saying that's what you think is happening here. Interesting. I actually would agree with you on that for sure.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. I'm just saying
in the long run.
And I do think, the hyperscalers are spending so much damn money that shareholders are going, hey, dudes, are you is this another Facebook fiasco on their on their metaverse? Or is it real? Now, I'm betting it's not the metaverse, and it's real. So I think that they're being very, they're trumpeting good marketing is my guess, but I'm sure others might have a much stronger, clearer view than I might have.
Well, look, your timing is right on. Meta just announced that their capital spending is going to be as high as $72 billion, from a previous high of $65 billion outlined in January, while also taking a write-down on their Meta Labs piece of, I think it was like $4.5 billion. So you're absolutely right. It's not slowing down. There's a lot more capital going into the startup and the hyperscaler space. And maybe they're just playing because everybody else is playing the game and they can't just sit on their hands. So time will tell. Till next time, John, thanks for jumping the tank.
All right. Thanks, Matt.